Hi, I'm David Taub, and welcome to the Parshah Rabbit Hole, where I find something weird in a weekly Torah portion and follow it all the way down until it gets even weirder. This week's rabbit hole eventually takes us to heresy, the question of whether God has a face, and the administrative policies of the afterlife.
Good afternoon and welcome to Judgment City.
But, as always, we have to get there. This week's episode was sponsored by a mysterious anonymous benefactor. If you'd like to sponsor an episode or make a small recurring donation, go to creativejudaism.com/donate. Okay, let's get started. One of the most notable things in this week's Torah portion, Parshah Sisa, is the story of the golden calf.
A god of gold! A golden calf!
It's a huge turning point in the early development of the Jewish people, and it helps establish just how un-Jewish it is to worship God through any type of physical form. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I do want to talk about is a part at the end of the Parsha where Moshe Rabbeinu, or Moses, wants to see God's face. This is what it says in the Parsha. Moshe tells Hashem, "Please show me your glory." Hashem says, "You can't see my face because no man can see me and live." But Hashem doesn't leave Moshe empty-handed. Hashem tells Moshe, "I will cover you with my hand until I pass by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Okay, so what we've got here is a relatively short interaction, which gives us a lot of anthropomorphization. We hear about Hashem's face, Hashem's hand, and Hashem's back.
Behold the hand of God!
Yo, show's over!
Which is weird, because according to any list of essential Jewish beliefs, believing that God is not corporeal is one of them. Probably the most famous of those types of lists is Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim, Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. Some of you may be more familiar with Yigdal, a song adapted from those principles of faith sometime in the Middle Ages, and which is sung in many synagogues all over the world. The relevant verse there is, Ein leidemus haguf ve'einai guf. Forgive me for singing, I was running late with this episode and didn't have time to ask a friend with a lovelier voice. But the meaning of that is that God doesn't have the form of a body and God is not a body. All of this is to say that when I was looking over this Parsha in preparation for this episode, this story about Hashem's face and hand and back jumped out at me. Especially since the Jews had literally just gotten over the most monumental theology fail in Jewish history.
We made a lot of mistakes, we weren't perfect. Golden calf. That was not good.
So that's where this week's rabbit hole starts, with some confusing verses that talk about God's body parts. So if you're ready to see where that goes, let's dive in. Okay, so unsurprisingly, all of the commentaries explain those verses in some sort of non-literal way. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's other stuff I want to get to, but I'll share a couple with you that made the most sense to me. There was a very long and confusing explanation from Ibn Ezra that involved a surprising amount of math, but after last week's episode, I figured I'd take a pass on the confusing Ibn Ezra stuff for this week. So first let's look at Heretic, who explains it in a brief but clear way. He says that when Hashem says, "You will see my back," that means a residual light that remains after Hashem passes by. So back doesn't mean back, it means aftermath or something like that. But we're still left with a lot of physical stuff we have to deal with, like what does it mean for God to pass through a physical space? I would assume that all of that is also not to be understood in physical terms, but Heretic leaves us to do that work for ourselves. Sforno gives us a different explanation that's even more conceptual. He says that seeing Hashem's back means that Moshe would be able to perceive all the spiritual forces that are below God, and when Hashem says, "But my face can't be seen," that means that nobody can perceive exactly how everything in existence emanates from God's singular and infinite existence. So that takes care of the physical stuff, but now it's so abstract that it's pretty difficult to grasp. Which in my opinion is probably why the Torah said back and face and hand, and then just gave each of us 80 years or so to figure it out. Okay, so now we've established that we shouldn't read these verses in physical terms and think that God actually has a face or a hand or a back. But what if somebody does believe that? And that's where our rabbit hole takes a turn towards heresy.
I heard about your heresy, and we've made it our mission to win you back to the flock.
There's a bunch of different terms for different types of heretics. Min, Epicurus, Käufer, and I was considering dedicating a portion of this rabbit hole to sorting out the different types of heretics. Luckily for you, when I started searching for one of those terms, min, I got redirected to something much less tedious than a survey of heretics in rabbinic literature. In Shemoneh Esrei, also known as the Amidah, the silent personal prayer that's the main attraction in the Jewish prayer service, there are 18 blessings, which is why it's called Shemoneh Esrei, which means 18.
Shemoneh Esrei! Shemoneh Esrei!
Aha, yes! Number 18! You beautiful number, Esrei! I love it!
But at a certain point in Jewish history, there was a 19th blessing added, which is called Birkas HaMinim, the blessing of the heretics. But don't let that name fool you. The purpose of the blessing of the heretics is actually not to bless the heretics, it's to do the opposite, to pray for the downfall of the heretics. So in the morning and afternoon prayer service, after we do the silent Amidah by ourselves, then the chazan or cantor leading the service repeats it out loud and everyone answers Amen. So there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, that says that if the chazan messes up and skips one of those brachas, then we remind him, and if he goes back and fixes it, we can continue. Unless the bracha he forgot is V'lam al Shinim, the heretic blessing, in which case we remove him immediately because we suspect that he might be a heretic.
Dad, the heathen's getting away!
I see him, son.
Okay, so I've always loved this halacha just because the imagery is fantastic. This guy is doing his thing, saying all the brachas, and everyone is answering Amen, and then suddenly a few people realize something might be off. And it takes a few seconds because, they're trying to figure it out, but then they realize this dude skipped the heretic bracha. And then there's two ways I imagine this could play out. One is that the rabbi or the shul president or the guy who arranges the kiddush or whatever, somebody with some sort of authority, quickly scampers over and whispers to the guy and gently guides him out by the shoulders out of the room. Which is scandalous and very exciting because most people probably didn't even catch the mistake and they just see, oh my goodness, the chazan was just interrupted in the middle and just escorted out. Now they got to start over. But there's another much more chaotic way that I think that this could go. And I think that that's actually more likely because nobody is prepared for this. It's not like there's a protocol in the synagogue bylaws for what happens if the chazan is a suspected heretic. So what I think would happen is that 5 guys would just run over and jump on the dude and throw him down to the ground. So yeah, that's some exciting imagery. But there's another thing that jumped out at me about this halacha when I rediscovered it when I was researching for this episode, which is a question. Why would a heretic even skip this bracha in the first place? If he doesn't believe in Judaism, what does he care? It doesn't mean anything. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch Harav explains this halacha in more detail in a way that I think answers this question. He says that if the prayer leader skips the heretic blessing, we remove him immediately because perhaps he has been overcome with feelings of heresy and he doesn't want to curse himself. So, according to this, we're talking about a particular flavor of heretic who still believes in the power of Jewish prayer and therefore believes that cursing the heretics would be bad for him. But it also tells us even more. It seems to me that this heretical chazan would need to have a very specific set of heretical beliefs. Besides for believing in the power of Jewish prayers and that the prayers would work and that the heretics would be punished, he also has to believe that he is a heretic. It's not like he believes that this is the true understanding of Judaism and that everyone else is wrong. Because if that was the case, then if he prays for the downfall of the heretics, then that wouldn't mean him, it would mean everyone else. So it has to be that part of his belief system is that he believes with all his heart that he's wrong about his beliefs. But the most exciting part of this entire thing for me is that this entire situation was completely avoidable. He totally could have avoided this, the heretical chazan. He didn't have to accept it. When they asked him, hey, can you lead the prayer service? He could have just said, nah, I'm not the guy. I don't have a good voice. But he didn't say that because this guy just loves standing in front of the shul and singing for everybody so much that he made a calculated risk and decided he was going to try and sneak by and skip the bracha and see if nobody notices, even though he knew that there was a very strong chance that he'd end up getting tackled by 6 guys who pay way too close attention in shul and who have been waiting for this exact opportunity their entire lives. So that's fun. Okay, so now I think we're ready to move on from the adventures of the heretical chazan, which, by the way, should totally be a Jewish children's book. So now let's get back to the specific issue of someone who believes that God has a body and whether that person would be branded a heretic. Rambam in Mishnah Torah gives us a 5-point checklist for what makes a person a heretic. I'm not going to go through all 5 because, honestly, I don't want to alienate any atheists. Just a reminder to all my atheist fans out there, remember to like and subscribe. Anyways, the part of this list that's relevant here is number 3. Somebody who believes in God, but says that God has a body or a form. That person is a heretic. So that seems pretty cut and dry. No two ways about it. Somebody believes that God has a body, heretic. But the Ravid, who wrote a critical commentary on Mishnah Torah, in which he points out everything he disagrees with, says this: why does Rambam call such a person a heretic? There are many people better and greater than him who have held that belief based on verses of the Torah and Midrashim, which can be easily misunderstood. So this is a pretty interesting response to Rambam's list of heretics. First of all, it's clear that he agrees that God doesn't have a body or form, and that people who do think this are misinterpreting the words of the Torah, because that's what he says at the end. So it seems like the only thing he's disagreeing with here is whether or not you can call such a person a heretic. But obviously, the most interesting thing about this piece from the Ravid is how harsh it seems, and that's what most of the commentaries deal with. For example, Kasef Mishnah, which is a commentary on Mishnah Torah by Yosef Karo, says, it's baffling. How could such a holy mouth say that people who believe that God has a body are better and greater than the Rambam?
I'm so much luckier than you.
And then he suggests that this is actually not the correct version of the text, and that the correct wording is a much less harsh version that's quoted in Sefer HaIkrim. So when I saw that, I decided to hop on over to Sefer HaIkrim and see what it says there. Sefer HaIkrim is a 15th century work that explores the essential principles of Jewish belief and discusses earlier works that also deal with those ideas. And indeed, the way the Ravid is quoted there is a lot less accusatory. But it also frames it in a way that offers a fascinating explanation of what the Ravid is really getting at. He says, according to the Ravid, if a person understands an essential idea in Torah in a way that is untrue because of an error in their analysis of the text, it's not right to call them a heretic. Then he concludes that someone whose intention is not to rebel against or stray from the truth or reject what's in the Torah or tradition, but is just trying to understand the text to the best of their ability, even if they get it wrong, they're not a heretic, God forbid. So it seems to me, based on Sefer HaIkrim, that the only person who you can call a heretic is somebody who would agree with that assessment. And I think a very good example of such a person would be the heretical chazan. Okay, so we're almost done, but I have one more thing that I want to share with you from Shem Mishmul, which is a Hasidic text by the Sakachover Rebbe from the early 1900s. He's talking about the power of a halachic ruling, and how a psak halacha, a decision of Jewish law decided by Jews here on earth, actually influences the spiritual reality above. And then he says that when the Rambam wrote that halacha, that anyone who believes that God has a body is a heretic, there were many, many souls who were kicked out of Gan Eden. That means that these souls had already passed all the tests, and they already made it to Gan Eden.
You're in the good place. You're okay, Eleanor. You're in the good place.
And I assume that some of them had probably been there for a very long time, maybe hundreds of years, and their beliefs hadn't been a problem until then. But as soon as the Rambam codified into Jewish law this idea that such a belief is heretical, that's it. They're out. So Shem Mishmul continues and says, but when the Ravid wrote, how can he call such a person a heretic, then all of those souls got readmitted back into Gan Eden. So I love this imagery. Maybe even more than I like the imagery of the heretical chazan getting tackled by a bunch of shushers. I'm imagining that Gan Eden has a shuttle bus that has to take huge groups of people in and out every time a new halachic ruling is made. And there's something wonderful to me about taking something like the afterlife that could seem precious and untouchable to others, but then as Jews we take it and subject it to the erratic ebbs and flows of humanity. It just feels very Jewish to me. Alright, that's it. That's the rabbit hole. As always, if you have any questions or you want to tell me about something I missed, put it in the comments. Thank you for following me down the rabbit hole. If you see a guy down here who says he's God, don't believe him.